Hey guys, welcome back. I'm out in the garden and I am about to harvest a whole bunch of kale. So I thought I'd take you along with me. I have kale planted in a bunch of random spots in my garden and it is growing really nicely. But this next week it is supposed to get really warm out, like in the upper 80s with a heat index of over 90. And once it starts to get that warm, things like spinach and kale, they just don't taste as good anymore. So I'm going to try to harvest a whole bunch of this before it gets hot out and take it all in, wash it up. Some of it will go in the fridge to eat this week, just in salads, and then the rest of it I'm going to pop in the dehydrator. Probably take a few rounds in the dehydrator because I have a lot of kale to pick. But I'll be putting that dehydrator, and then after it's dehydrated, I'll have that put aside for soups, smoothies, and things like that. Okay. So I thought I'd take you along to harvest kale with me and then dehydrate it, okay? Okay, so here's the first bed of kale that I'm going to be harvesting from. I'm going to go along and I'm going to harvest all of the largest leaves, so I'll leave the tiny leaves behind. I've talked about before, whenever you are harvesting leafy greens, if you harvest the largest leaves first and leave the innermost part of the plant, the smallest leaves, it will continue to produce. So I'm going to go ahead and harvest all these larger leaves. I'll still leave enough behind that I'm not killing the plants. And if it cools back off in the next week or so, or if we get a lot of overcast days, it'll still keep producing, and then I'll still have more kale. I'm just harvesting this so that it doesn't get bitter next week, basically. So there is all the kale behind me. I'm going to go through and harvest a whole bunch of it and throw it into this bucket. Okay, so I'm going to be harvesting these really big leaves. Kind of watching as I go, making sure I'm not harvesting any that have major bug damage or anything on it, like that one. I'm not for sure if that's just a tear, if it's bug damage, but I'm not going to take that inside. Okay, and I'm just throwing it into my bucket here. So when I'm harvesting this, I'll show you here, and this is planted very densely, my kale is, but like right here is a plant, and you can tell I've already harvested a lot off of this one, but in the middle here there are tiny little new leaves coming out, and right there in the centermost part is the newest leaf. Okay, this is how leafy greens work. They're always putting on new leaves from the most center part. So as long as you're picking the outer largest leaves, you're not going to kill your plant. Okay, you do need to leave behind enough leaves so that photosynthesis and all the so that there's enough leaves to gather energy so the plant can continue to grow. You don't want to strip it bare. You don't want to just only leave one little leaf, but as long as you're leaving some leaves on there and harvesting the biggest outermost leaves of your kale, spinach, lettuces, you'll be able to continue to grow more because it'll continue to produce from the center. Like here's another little example of that. There's the newest little sprouts. Okay, so if that's my plant, get it here to the side where we can really look at that. I've already harvested everything off of that. That's all that's left, but that will continue to produce, okay? So we're just going to come along here. It's actually about to storm, so that's the other reason why I'm trying to go ahead and work quickly. We're just going to harvest a whole bunch of this, okay? This kale is blue curled Scotch kale. I believe I may have said that backwards, but it is an heirloom variety, and it grows really well here, and it is fairly resistant to like cabbage moths and such as that will sometimes come in by this time of the year as it starts to get warmer, and they can really decimate your entire crop of any type of brassica like this. I'm a leafy green, and these tend to be, you can see how curly this is, hence the name. This Like there's one that has been eaten on. I'll just toss that down there. Don't want that one, but here's a nice large leaf. Get a nice little harvest in here without killing our plants, okay? So still have lots of kale and that much from this one little area. Okay, so there's my first bit of kale. Still have, I think 3 more places where it is planted, so let's just move to the next little spot. This is the next little spot. I planted it here just sort of like as a ground cover, because in the background here we have, this is all last year's celery, and the celery overwintered and it's now putting on little seed heads, and we'll be giving off celery seed, hopefully sooner than later. So this is all celery in the background. I'm just kind of sacrificing this bed to have heirloom celery seed. This is the only celery growing in my garden, so it should be true to type. I'm excited about that. I have not saved celery seed until now, and so we have that going on right there. And so while I knew that this would be going into summertime before I actually get to save that seed, I went ahead early on and planted all of this gorgeous kale underneath it, and so that's where I am harvesting from again. And once again, the cicadas are out in full force, being noisy and loud. I'm very sorry about the background noise, but there's just, unless I do a voiceover, there's nothing I can do about it. And that's just how it is. The spring is being interrupted by all of the very loud cicadas. They actually had only been in the fields and forest close to our house, but now, this has been munched on by something. I don't want that one. But now the cicadas have moved into my garden. They're everywhere. One just landed on my head a few minutes ago. Don't want that one. So you can tell we have a lot of kale to harvest from here. And there's some, we have some right there as well. Okay, so I have harvested a lot from this one little area, and as you can tell, there is still so much more that I can harvest from. This smaller little leaves like this, that is what we really enjoy in our salads. The small, tender little guys. So whenever I go through these to decide what I'm going to be dehydrating and what will be going into the fridge, I will probably separate it out by size. And we will keep the smallest little ones for us to eat fresh. Kale is really great for goats and chickens and things of that nature. It's really high in a lot of good for you vitamins and nutrients, as are most dark leafy greens. So I can take any of this. If I get tired of dehydrating, run out of room, whatever's left over, we will just take out to the chicken coop or to the goats, and they will be excited for the treat. None of this will go to waste, no doubt. In fact, anytime I'm in the garden, the goats always tend to come over towards the garden when I'm out here, because they know they're probably going to get a little garden treat thrown over the fence. That's one reason why I have my garden really close to the fence, is because it makes it very simple to just toss over. You know, if you have a extra piece of squash, or if I come through and I pull up some old plants, I can just toss it over the fence to them. Okay, so I've harvested quite a bit from here. You can tell there is still plenty left behind here. So we are going to go ahead and move. I say that, and then I see lots more really good ones that I want to harvest from. Let's see here. I think I have some more. I have more right over there. So let's go harvest from that. Here's our little bucket. Okay, so we're over here. This kale has grown a lot taller. It's in full sun. As you can tell, the kale that is over there is underneath the shade of this tree during the hottest part of the day. So that will actually probably fare better next week than this will, because kale is a cool weather crop. With all of the heat that'll be coming in and this being in direct sun, it will probably start to taste bitter. So as I was saying, this kale is in full sun, as you can see. Next week is supposed to be in the upper 80s, like 88 with a heat index of over 90. This kale being out here in the direct sun probably isn't going to hold up nearly as well as the one that's over in the shade. So I'm going to harvest really heavily from this bed. In fact, debating on whether to just pull it up. I think I'll leave a little bit behind, but we're going to harvest from this pretty heavily. So these kale and spinach, they both start to taste bitter when they're out in the direct sun and it gets really hot. So once again, that's why I'm harvesting all of this now, to store it away, really trying not to waste what I have grown. So this will be great in pastas and soups, smoothies, all sorts of things, and you can always give it as a treat, as a supplement to my chickens or goats as well. Okay, so here's this bed of lettuce. This has some really, not lettuce, ew, I have a bug on me, of kale. There's a lot of really big leaves on here, and I'm noticing some bug damage here. And especially, like, look at that. Ew. Look at all those eggs. We definitely want to make sure that we get that. Throw that way far away from, I don't know if you can see it or not, but that is a lot of eggs that will cause lots of problems. We're going to get rid of that ASAP. Okay, so I'm going to harvest in here, being mindful of looking for any type of bug damage or eggs, like what I just showed you there. Here's some bug damage on that one. Put that to the side, feed that to the chickens. If they have any eggs on them, and then I feed to the chickens, it's a pretty surefire way of making sure that those eggs do not hatch. Alright, and there are a few of these little weeds in here with this. Don't want to accidentally add that in with our kale, so let's get that pulled. Okay. Bed, I have all of this kale we've been harvesting from. I have tomatoes here behind them. So once this kale is done, you know, we don't have wasted space. These tomatoes are looking great. A few of them have even started to put on blooms. And behind them, if you can see here, we had, see if I can zoom in here, we had peas. These are the last survivors of the peas over here in the direct sun. I need to harvest those probably tomorrow. They look like they're starting to fill up. So we have kale, we have tomatoes, we have peas, several different things growing here. And just taking the time to come out here and get this before it all goes to waste, before the sun gets to it, and the heat can really make a difference in the winter time when we are wanting to have some extra greens. Now, our kale grows pretty much year round. We almost always have kale, but like I said, won't be wasted. Chickens love it. We love kale. It's so good for you. I still got this whole other side to harvest from. Okay, so I have a bucket of good kale, and I have a bucket of not good kale that they are waiting on. So let's go feed this to the goatsies. Come on, guys. Come on. Come on. Come on. and get the yummies. Throw it in there to them. Oop. See if we can hold this and do this at the same time. Probably not. Alright, y'all ready? So one thing I also wanted to show you down here while we're on the subject of kale, I wanted to show you what kale looks like when it goes to seed. So this is one little kale plant that was left over from last fall. It's actually, here's the kale plant with the yellow flowers. Around it is all of my potatoes. I left this kale here. We actually harvested from it very early on, like in February and March. It was still holding on, and in April it bolted. Now, bolting means the plant started to grow out here a little bit. The plant started to grow tall, and it started to put on little heads like this right here. Okay, so once a plant bolts, that means it's about to go to seed, and it's not going to taste good. But I decided to go ahead and leave this kale here so that I could seed save from it, and it's not really bothering our potatoes at all. The potato plants are doing fine around it. So this is what kale looks like when it bolts or goes to seed. It starts out like this. Okay, right there. And then that will open up. See here, each one of those will open up into a individual yellow flower. And that's what we have here. Okay, this has grown out really nice and tall. Okay, so it'll grow these long stems out with flowers. At one point in time, there was a flower on each one of these. These are the little, this is what is left behind after the petals fall off of the flower. And these will become the seed pods. And they will begin, they start out really small, and then they begin to grow. The pods begin to swell and grow bigger and bigger. Let's see if we have any. They're all pretty new, so I don't see any that are super big, but they will eventually, each one of these little pods will grow out about this long. They will swell up with seeds inside, and then I will let it dry out. I will pop the pods off and remove the dried seeds, and I will have kale seed. I am able to seed save from this kale because it is an heirloom variety, and by letting this one little plant grow here, I'm saving myself probably 2 packages worth of kale, so maybe $6 to $8 in seed. And every year that you save seed and it grows back in your same area, it's going to become more resistant to pests. It's going to become more hardy to your individual climate. So seed saving from your own garden through heirloom plants is a great way to save money and to grow more resilient plants in the future. And the bonus is I don't have a lot of other things that are blooming at the moment in the garden, but these little flowers the pollinators love, and this will draw in pollinators, and they will love it. So that is what kale looks like whenever it is going to seed. I actually believe I have a video somewhere in the archive on saving kale seed. If I can go back and find it, I believe there's one. I will try to add the link below, or add it in here at the end of this video. Okay guys, so we have our big bucket of kale here. Let's take this inside and get it in the dehydrator. First I'm going to take it in, wash it through really good a few times. We're going to dry it off and then throw it in the dehydrator. Okay, so I'm just going to leave them in the bucket that they're already in and fill this up with water, let it soak And then we will drain it, rinse, and repeat a few times until I'm so confident that these are all nice and clean. Okay, so we have our kale. I have just been sort of turning it like this. Now I'm going to take it and move it on over to my sink to secondary, and I'm going to work in smaller batches with it in here so I can really move it around, hoping that if there was anything on it that I'm sort of agitating it and shaking that off. And then from here, take the little individual leaves, check them. I will lay them on a towel here and let them dry, and then we will add them to the dehydrator. So this can take a little bit of time, but it's harder for me to do one-handed while holding the camera, but you get the gist, okay? Okay, so I'm sort of in my next phase here, and that is I'm going to take some of my kale. I went ahead and wrapped it, just rolled it up in the dish towel. Roll it back out here. It should be pretty dry. Can continue to hand dry it a little bit here as we go in, but the dehydrator will ultimately obviously is going to finish drying it out. Some of these that are still a little bit wet will hand dry those really quick. So what we are going to do next is we are going to take our kale. Okay, I have a Nesco Garden Master. This is just a dehydrator. If you do not have a dehydrator, you can use your oven turned down really low. I am going to have it turned to 135, and I'm going to start with 6 hours for kale. So each one of these is a tray. I have my first little tray here. Move it over here. And I am going to place my kale in a single layer on my drying rack here, okay? So that it's not overlapping. Some of these are still a little bit wet, so I'm sort of dabbing them off as we go here. Okay. I want to make sure I'm getting all of the really big kale leaves in here first, and some of the little ones like this, I'll keep those over to the side. That's probably the ones I will keep to eat as fresh eating. Okay, even if they have the stem, I'm still going to dry them with the stem on, because for the kale that I will be grinding up into like a kale powder, I will just grind up the stem and everything. So you can see here, We just don't want our kale overlapping a whole bunch. That way it can dry as evenly as possible. Okay. Trying to sort of flatten out my leaves like that. Okay, so I have a tray here that is ready. We'll set that to the side and move on to the next one. Okay, all of my kale is in there. All the trays are full, as you can see in the top. Okay, so we are just going to we have it on 135. I'm going to turn it on. And we are just going to let this run. I actually have it purposefully on my stove so that I can turn on my fan, because your dehydrator can really get stinky. Which kale isn't super stinky, but it will give off an odor, but especially when I'm dehydrating things like onions or peppers. Actually, if I do peppers, I do that out in the garage because it makes all of our eyes get red and itchy. But I usually, if I can, set it on my stove and turn the vent on above it so that it can take away a little bit of the smell. This is going to run for at least 6 hours, maybe 8. What I will probably do halfway through is I will take the bottom trees and move them to the top, and take the top ones and move them to the bottom, so everything gets more evenly dried. And then we'll come back 6 to 8 hours later. We'll check on it. If everything is dry, then we will be adding some into a food processor to make a powder with. Some we will leave as whole leaves, and I'll store them away in glass jars with oxygen absorbers, and then they'll be ready to store away and use later. Okay, so it is the next day and the kale is finished. This took about 7.5 hours for it to dry, and what I did is I just started checking at 6 hours, and once it got to this point where it's very dry and crispy but not discolored, that is when I went ahead and turned it off until it's still nice and green, which is good. You don't want it to turn brown. It'll start to taste weird and basically taste overly dry and burnt. So then I'm going to take this, and half of this I am going to add into jars as whole leaves, and those will be what I will use whenever I am making soup that calls for like a kale or spinach. I can take out these whole leaves, kind of chop them up a little bit, and then add those to my soups or pastas, and those will work great for that. And then the other half of it, I will put it in the food processor and grind it into a powder, and I'll save that in a jar as well, and then just add to it as I continue to dehydrate more kale. So you can push these down in there really well. They will start to crumble, but that's fine. And so then I am going to add an oxygen absorber. I bought these off of Amazon in a big pack of them. Use them for all sorts of stuff. I'm going to put a lid on it, and as far as storage goes with dehydrated, something like this that's dehydrated, as long as there's no moisture getting to this can be shelf stable for anywhere from 6 months to a year. After that, I just set the jar in the freezer and move it over to a Ziploc bag and freeze it. Thanks for watching today, and I hope you have a blessed day. And if you haven't, I would love it if you would like and subscribe at the Heirloom Gardener. Follow us on Instagram and YouTube as well. Thanks again, guys.